Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 11th June 2020. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now, this article on page number 15 talks about a new kind of tax that is being discussed, and that is known as the border adjustment tax. And in this regard, a member of the Niti Aayog has favored imposing a border adjustment tax on the imports in order to create a level playing field between the imported and the domestic goods. So in this regard, it is important for us to understand what is meant by this border adjustment tax and what is the rationale behind imposition of such a tax. So in this article, we will try and understand what is this border adjustment tax, what is the rationale behind the introduction of such tax, and what is the status of the border adjustment tax proposal, and will a border adjustment tax be compatible with the WTO rules. So now simply this border adjustment tax is in the form of an additional custom duty which is imposed on the imported goods. Now the idea behind imposition of such a tax is to ensure that the prices of the imported goods are brought on par with the domestic goods. And in this background, it seeks to create a level playing field between the domestic goods and the imported goods. So how does this border adjustment tax seeks to create a level playing field between the domestic goods and the imported goods? So let us understand the rationale behind the introduction of such border adjustment tax. So the main rationale behind imposition of such border adjustment tax is that it seeks to create a level playing field between the domestic goods and the imported goods. Now we already know that the introduction of goods and services tax was a major indirect tax reform, and it has subsumed a number of indirect taxes, and at the same time it provides for input tax credits. And all these measures seek to do away with the cascading effect of tax on tax and boost the manufacturing sector. However, even after the introduction of GST, the industries pay a number of taxes and levies which are outside the GST regime, and hence the industries cannot avail input tax credit on such taxes or levies which are outside the GST regime. And this in turn leads to increase in the prices of the goods, and such taxes and levies are called as the embedded taxes. Now some of these embedded taxes can include the electricity duty, duties on fuel, clean energy cess, mandi tax, etc. So now when there is presence of embedded taxes, what would happen when such goods with embedded taxes are exported to the other countries? So this would lead to increase in the prices of our exported goods and make them costlier and uncompetitive in the destination country. Now the reverse scenario of this is that when imported goods come into our country, such imported goods may not have embedded taxes which are imposed in their source countries. And this leads to the decrease in the price of such products, and they are more competitive in terms of prices as compared to the domestic goods with embedded taxes in India. So this simply means that the goods that we import do not have embedded taxes at times. However, the goods which are produced in India have embedded taxes which are outside the GST regime. And this makes the imported goods more competitive or cheaper as compared to the goods that are produced within India. So now how do we bring the imported goods on parity with the goods that are being produced in India with embedded taxes? So first solution can be to provide for input tax credit on these embedded taxes. And this would bring down the prices of domestic goods on par with the imported goods. And at the same time, this would also improve or boost our exports. So in this regard, the Union Cabinet has already announced the scheme which is known as the remission of duties and taxes on exported products. And under this scheme, the exporters are provided with reimbursement of taxes, duties or levies which are imposed at the central, state and local level and which are outside the GST regime. And the refund is provided in the form of duty credit scrips, and these scrips can be used by the exporters to pay various taxes or duties to the government. And these duty scrips can also be sold by the exporters in the open market. Now another option that is available in front of us is the imposition of additional customs duty on the imported goods to bring their prices on par with the domestic goods. So this measure is provided for goods which are exported from India. However, for goods which are imported into India, This is the proposal that has been forwarded, and it is the imposition of the additional customs duty on the imported goods in order to bring their prices on par with the domestic goods. And this new idea is known as the border adjustment tax proposal. So what we understand till now is that we are exporting some goods from India, and at the same time we are also importing certain goods from other countries. So in order to make the exports competitive, we are providing input tax credit on the embedded taxes, which sometimes increase the prices of the goods which are being exported. And in order to bring the imported goods on par with the domestic goods, the proposal is of imposing additional customs duty in the form of border adjustment tax. So now after this, let us look at what is the status of this border adjustment tax proposal right now. So in this regard, the Ministry of Commerce has urged the Department of Revenue to consider imposing this border adjustment tax in the form of an additional customs duty. And in this line, the ministry has proposed to amend the Section 3 of the Customs Act to impose this BAT or the border adjustment tax. So the ministry wants to identify goods on which this additional customs levy could be imposed and quantify the tariffs for such identified products. Now, one of the important concerns regarding the border adjustment tax proposal is that will it be compatible with the World Trade Organization's rules? And under the WTO, the member countries have already decided on the upper limits on the custom duties on various products. And the imposition of additional customs duty in the form of border adjustment tax may violate this upper limit. And in this line, other member countries may file case against India under the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism. However, India's Commerce Ministry has clarified and it believes that the proposed border adjustment tax is compatible with the global trade norms. And the argument of Commerce Ministry is based on the Article 2 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And under this provision, member countries can impose additional customs duties to bring the prices of imported goods on par with the domestic goods. And in this line, India believes that it can take support of such a provision to impose the border adjustment tax. So accordingly, India believes that such imposition of additional customs duty in the form of border adjustment tax will not violate the WTO rules. So this border adjustment tax is still a proposal and let us wait for it to be finalized. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 6 talks about an important ongoing issue related to the G7 countries. And he has also called for expanding the G7 countries to a new grouping called as the G11 grouping. So in this background, this article discusses certain issues with the functioning of the G7 grouping, and also it calls for a new institutional mechanism for handling the global challenges. Now, in this regard, this can be a very important aspect for us from the General Studies Paper 2 point of view under the topic International Relations. Now, if you go through the DNS of 4th June 2020 and 31st May 2020, we have discussed in detail the background of G7 grouping and also the proposed G11 grouping by the President of United States of America. However, in this article, let us look at the changing economic situation globally, which warrants an expansion of the G7 grouping. Also, let us look at the limitations in the functionings of the G7 grouping and also why we need a new institutional mechanism to handle the international challenges. Now, we note that the G7 grouping was formed as a reaction to the increasing crude oil prices in 1970s. And the crude oil prices in 1970s had been increasing because of the Arab-Israel conflict. And they mainly aimed at handling the worsening economic situation because of the Arab-Israel conflict and the impact of increasing crude oil prices on the global economy. However, now the author argues that the economic situation is changing and accordingly the G7 grouping should be expanded. So the argument that has been provided by the author is that when it was constituted, the G7 countries accounted for close to 2/3 of the global GDP. However, they now account for less than 1/3 of the global GDP on the purchasing power parity terms and less than half on the market exchange rates basis. In this background, the author also says that there are several emerging economies which are now contributing more to the global GDP. And in this regard, the author says that the 7 largest emerging economies, that is the E7 economies, which comprises of Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Russia and Turkey, account for over 1/3 of the global GDP on purchasing power parity terms, which is almost equal to the GDP contribution of these G7 countries. Further, we note that India's economy is already the third largest in the world in the PPP terms. And six of the seven of the world's best performing economies will be China, India, the United States of America, Indonesia, Brazil, and Russia by the year 2050. Further, it is projected that India's GDP will increase to 17 trillion in 2030 and to 42 trillion in 2050 in purchasing power parity terms. And in this regard, India will be second only to China, just ahead of United States of America in the year 2050. So this states that the economic situation is changing and the context in which G7 countries were formed has now changed completely. Now after this, let us look at some of the limitations in the functioning of this G7 grouping. Now highlighting the limitations of the G7 countries, the author says that the G7 countries failed to handle the economic recession or the downturn of 2007 and 2008. And we note that there was global economic recession in the year 2007 and 8. Now, as a reaction to the failure of G7 countries in handling the economic recession of 2007 and 8, a new grouping was created which was known as the G20 grouping. And this included both the countries of the G7 groupings as well as the emerging economies of that time. Further, the author says that the G7 countries have not raised concerns with respect to the important contemporary issues. And these include the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate change, the challenge of the Daesh and the ISIS, and also the crisis of state collapses in the West Asian or Middle Eastern region. Further, the G7 countries have announced that its members would phase out all the fossil fuels and subsidies, but they have not announced any clear plan of action to do so. And it needs to be highlighted here that the G7 countries are amongst the highest contributors to the global CO2 emissions or the historical CO2 emissions. So the ineffectiveness of the G7 countries in handling the contemporary issues of our times highlight that there is a need for a new institution or a new institutional mechanisms for handling the emerging global challenges. And in this regard, some of the global challenges which are emerging include the trade war, the economic slowdown or the global economic slowdown, political turmoil in the West Asian region, and also a new institution is required to counter terrorism and counter proliferation of the weapons, etc. Further, there is a need to ensure effective implementation of the 1975 Biological Weapons Convention, and its effective implementation is required to control the possible creation of new microorganisms or viruses by using the emerging DNA technologies. Further, there is a need for finding effective solutions to burning issues like the Iran's nuclear program, peace and stability in Afghanistan, the Gulf and West Asia, and also there is a need for reductions in the tensions in Korean Peninsula and the South China Sea. So we see that there are emerging global challenges and G7 countries have failed to address some of these important global challenges. And accordingly, the author highlights the need for a new institution or new mechanism and agrees with the President of the United States of America for the expansion of the G7 countries into a new grouping which is more inclusive and takes into consideration the changing economic scenario. And in this line, he calls out for including the emerging economies of our times into this G7 grouping. So these were few important aspects regarding the limitations of the G7 grouping. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now this article on page number 7 is related to a new change which has been introduced in the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So this article raises concerns with respect to these changes which have been introduced under this Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which was primarily aimed at benefiting the MSME sector. However, the authors have raised the concerns that these changes in the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code are not likely to bring the much needed impact. So let us look at the background, what was the announcement regarding this IBC and what are the concerns that have been raised by the authors in this regard. And this can be an important aspect for us from the General Studies paper 3 point of view. Now we note that the COVID-19 pandemic has created a difficult situation for the MSMEs and it has led to supply side disruption, and due to which it is likely that the MSMEs will not be able to repay their loans. And there is a genuine apprehension that such MSMEs may default on the loan repayment and hence they will fall under the resolution process under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Now presently we note that the threshold for invoking the IBC for the corporate entities is rupees 1 lakh. And if a company defaults on the loan repayment of rupees 1 lakh and above, then it would automatically come under the resolution process of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. And for individuals, this threshold is of rupees 1000. Now, to give relief to the MSME sector, the Government of India has made certain announcements under the economic stimulus package. So, first announcement is that it has announced the increase in the threshold for invoking the IBC for corporates. And we note that the COVID-19 pandemic has made it difficult for the MSMEs to repay their loans. And in this regard, the Government of India has increased the threshold for invoking this IBC for the corporate entities from rupees 1 lakh to rupees 1 crore. And this would provide relief to the MSME sector. Second is the Special Insolvency Resolution Framework for MSMEs. And under this, the Section 240A of the IBC empowers the central government to come up with a special insolvency resolution for the MSMEs. And accordingly, the Finance Minister has announced that the government would soon come up with a notification for Special Insolvency Framework for MSMEs. And also, the Government of India has announced a halt on the IBC proceedings. So the announcement is that there will be suspension of fresh initiation of any insolvency proceedings up to 6 months. And this may be extended to 1 year depending upon the pandemic situation. So this means that no application for insolvency resolutions would be initiated for any default which takes place between March 25 to September 25 and which can further be extended for another 6 months. So this means that in all, the Government of India has provided certain relief to the MSME sector from the proceedings of the IBC. However, even after such announcements, the authors have raised certain concerns regarding these announcements. So let us look at what are the concerns that have been raised. So the concern that has been raised by the authors regarding these measures which have been announced by the Government of India to give relief to the MSME sector are that the approach that has been followed by the Government of India is that of one size fits all approach. And this will not necessarily give relief to all the MSMEs that are functional in India. So in this regard, the authors say that some companies may have defaulted due to problems that have been created by COVID-19. However, there might be other companies that may have defaulted due to poor management or any other internal reasons. And ideally, the halt on the IBC proceedings should have been applicable to only the first category of companies which have been affected or have defaulted due to the problems created by COVID-19 pandemic. And this relief should not have been provided to companies which have defaulted due to poor management or other internal reasons. So the authors say that the National Company Law Tribunal should have been given discretionary powers to decide whether the halt in the insolvency proceedings should be provided to a particular company or not. So this should have been decided by the National Company Law Tribunal, and this blanket relief should not have been provided to all the MSMEs which are not functioning properly. So in all, the authors say that the relief should have been provided only to those MSMEs which have defaulted due to the problems created by the COVID-19 pandemic. Further, we note that the Government of India has announced or decided to increase the threshold for invoking the IBC for corporate entities from rupees 1 lakh to rupees 1 crore. However, the authors say that this threshold limit or increase in threshold limit operates against the interests of MSMEs. And this is because the banks will now be forced to approach civil courts to recover the undisputed debts below rupees 1 crore. And this will further create problems for the functioning of MSMEs. And in short, it is not a kind of relief that has been provided by the Government of India. However, it will further increase the hassle for these MSMEs to do their business. So these are few concerns that have been raised by the authors regarding the new measures that have been announced by the Government of India to provide relief to the MSME sector. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 7 touches two important aspects that the Indian healthcare system is facing during the COVID-19 pandemic. First is that there are exorbitant rates that are being charged for the patients, and are these rates justified during a pandemic? And in this line, we note that majority of these high rates are being charged by the private sector hospitals. So the author has further raised the concern that why do we have so many private hospitals in a poor country such as India? So in this article, we will mainly look at the reasons for the abundance of private healthcare in India and why is there a lack of adequate public healthcare. So let us look at some important pointers in this regard, and they can be important for us from the General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic social issues and social justice. So now this issue of more private hospitals in India as compared to public healthcare system has come in the light of India's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we note that we have more hospital beds in private sector as compared to the public sector. And although these private sector hospitals have more capacity as compared to the public health sector, these private sector hospitals have been charging exorbitant rates to the COVID-19 patients. And this is leading to increased burden on the poor population of India. So now what are the issues with the healthcare system in India? Let us focus on these reasons. So now in this regard, it has been highlighted that since independence, India has focused rightly on the larger picture. And the priority in front of India was the primary care, preventive measures, immunization, maternity and pediatric care, as well as dealing with common infections such as tuberculosis. And on all these fronts, we have done quite well. And this has helped India in having improvement in the healthcare indices in the last few decades. However, there have not been enough specialized facilities that have been provided by the public healthcare system. So the focus has mainly been on preventive and primary care and also on immunization. And much focus has not been paid on specialized healthcare facilities in the public healthcare system. And this issue has been highlighted during this pandemic that the public healthcare system does not have more number of beds and also ventilators, etc. And we are now relying on the private sector for handling this situation of COVID-19 pandemic. Further, we note that India has increasing middle class, and also their increasing wealth has produced an explosion in the demand for good quality healthcare. And this has led to an increase in the private sector hospitals in India. Further, there has been lack of adequate investment in the public healthcare system. And we note that the Indian government spends only about 1.3% of the GDP on public healthcare system, which is very inadequate for a huge populous country like India. Also, there is lack of professional medical education and training, and this has resulted in informalization of medical profession. Now, it is estimated that there are more than 1 million unqualified medical practitioners, and these are mostly in the rural areas. Further, another issue with the Indian healthcare system is that there is lack of transparency and there is tighter administration. And specialists are not adequately compensated in the government sector. So in this regard, the specialist doctors have a tendency to move towards the private sectors. Further, not too many initiatives were taken for the reverse brain drain or retention of skilled medical professionals in India. And we note that most of the skilled doctors move abroad in order to fetch more returns. Further, there is wide range of income and wealth in India, and this has resulted in skewed medical healthcare. Now, it is estimated that the wealth of top 1% in India is about 4 times the combined wealth of bottom 70%. And due to this, the private sectors have been propping up in different parts of India to cater to this top 1% of India. And accordingly, the focus of the private sector has not been on addressing the issues of the poorer sections of the society. And as such, the poor 70% population of India is left at the mercy of an unpredictable public healthcare system. So these are some of the issues that have been highlighted by the author regarding the healthcare system in India and why are there more number of private hospitals in India as compared to the public sector. Further, why is there lack of specialized facilities in the public healthcare sector on which the 70% of poor population of India depends. So in this regard, some of the suggestions that have been provided by the author are also important. So let us look at some of these suggestions. So now the author suggests that there is a need for greater transparency and tighter administration for appropriate resource utilization. Second is that there is a need for adequate compensation and remuneration for skilled medical professionals in the public healthcare system. And this increased compensation and remuneration will help the public healthcare system to retain more skilled medical professionals, and also this will improve the proper skilled medical professionals in the private sector as well. Further, there is a need for higher government spending in the public healthcare system, and we note that the national health policy mandates about 2.5% of the gross GDP by 2025. Further, it is suggested that the healthcare system cannot be left to the private practitioners. Now, in this regard, a case study has been highlighted which compares the public spending in the United States of America as compared to that of the European countries. So, this case study states that the United States of America spends about 15% of its GDP on the healthcare in the form of insurance based private medicine. However, the US has poorer healthcare indices as compared to the Europe, and the European nations have government funded universal healthcare system. So even though the per capita healthcare expenditure in Europe is substantially less than the US, it has a better functioning and efficient healthcare system as compared to that of United States of America. So this highlights that if the government spends more on the healthcare, it leads to better results in the health of the population. And this has been highlighted by this case study which compares the public spending in the United States of America with that of Europe. So this makes a case for increased public spending by the Government of India for improving the healthcare of Indian population. Further, the healthcare spending by the government must be appropriate and based on evidence and should be transparent and accountable. And further, the training of the doctors and the healthcare workers also needs to be the responsibility of the government mainly, and this should not be left in the hands of private sector. Further, the private hospitals and institutions needs to be regulated. And in this regard, costing and auditing of the care and procedures need to be done by independent bodies. And this will not only ensure appropriate care at the right cost, but also prevent unreasonable demands of suspicious patients and family. So these are some of the suggestions that have been provided by the authors in this regard for improving the public healthcare system in India. So few points that we have discussed regarding the issues in the Indian healthcare system and some of the suggestions can be important for us from the mains examination point of view under the topics health in the general studies paper 2. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now this article on page number 11 talks about a recent advisory which has been given out by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So in this regard, the Ministry of Environment has issued an advisory that people who are importing exotic live species will have to make a voluntary disclosure. And this decision has been taken in the background of the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic and which has raised global concern about illegal wildlife trade and zoonotic diseases. So some of the aspects that we will discuss in this article can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view under the topics general issues on environment and ecology. So in this, let us look at how is exotic live species defined and has anything changed regarding the imports of exotic live species. So now how is exotic live species defined? So there are two conditions that need to be satisfied for a species to be defined as an exotic live species. So this animal or plant species which has moved from their original range or location to a new location or range. And the second condition that needs to be satisfied is that the animals should be named under the appendices 1, 2 and 3 of the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species, Sites of the Wild Fauna and Flora. Now here it is important to note that both the animal as well as plant species can be part of the exotic live species. And the two conditions that they need to satisfy to be called out as exotic live species are that they should be enumerated or they should be under the appendices 1, 2 and 3 of the CITES convention, and also these animals and plant species should have been moved from their original range or location to a new range or location. And due to this order, what has changed is that for new exotic live species, the importer will have to obtain a no objection certificate from the Chief Wildlife Warden of the state. And also for existing species stocks, they will have to be declared by the owner or the holder to the Chief Wildlife Warden of the concerned state or union territory. So the owners or the holders will have to declare the existing exotic live species to the Chief Wildlife Warden, and what was their stock as on 1st January 2020 will also have to be declared to the Chief Wildlife Warden. So these are few important aspects for us from the preliminary examination point of view, and with this let's take up the next news article. Now this article on page number 1 talks about the census of the Gir lions, and it has indicated that there has been increase in the numbers of Gir lions in Gujarat, and their numbers have risen by 29% over the last 5 years. Now this Gir lion is important for us from preliminary examination point of view under the topic environment and ecology. Now, if you go through the prelims paper of last year, you will find that a question was asked indirectly related to the Gir lions, and this was because of a disease which had impacted the population of Gir lions, and there was death of some Gir lions because of the canine distemper virus. So in this regard, in previous DNS videos, we have discussed about important aspects of Gir lions, and which include that these are the species of Asiatic lions. And one important fact regarding the Gir lions is that their range is restricted exclusively to the Gir Forest National Park in the Indian state of Gujarat, which means that they are now found only in India, and that too in the state of Gujarat. And under the IUCN's red list, it has been listed under the endangered category because of its small size and area of occupancy. Now, after the preliminary examination of 2019, we had discussed some important questions that were asked in the preliminary examination of 2019 in the DNS videos. So what we will do is that we will revise the question that was asked based on the Gir lions in the preliminary examination of 2019, and how could you effectively use the Daily News Simplified for solving questions in the preliminary examination, or how useful is the Daily News Simplified for you in handling the questions in the preliminary examination. So let us revise from that video. So it reads, consider the following statements. The first statement is that Asiatic lion is naturally found in India only. Second statement reads, double-humped camel is naturally found in India only. Third statement reads, one-horned rhinoceros is naturally found in India only. And the question reads, which of the statements given above is or are correct? Now, the Asiatic lion or the Gir lion was recently in news because of a viral disease which affected the lions in the Gir sanctuary of Gujarat. And this led to the death of large number of lions in that sanctuary. Now, the Asiatic lion was covered in the DNS of 21st September 2018 and also on 9th February 2019. Further, regarding one-horned rhinoceros, it was covered in the DNS of 29th December 2018. Now, in the DNS of 21st September 2018, we have discussed that presently the Gir forest is the only habitat for wild lions, and these lions face risk from epidemics, natural disasters, and man-animal conflicts. Further, in the DNS of 9th February 2019, we have discussed the various habitats in the state of Gujarat of this lion, and this includes the Gir Sanctuary, the Gir National Park, Girnar Sanctuary, Pania Sanctuary, and the Mityala Sanctuary. So by this you can reach the conclusion that the first statement is correct, that Asiatic lion is naturally found in India only. Further, in the DNS of 29 December 2018, we have discussed the distribution of greater one-horned rhinoceros. And in this it has been provided that it is found in India and Nepal. So by this you can easily eliminate the third statement that one-horned rhinoceros is naturally found in India only. And by eliminating the third statement, you can easily eliminate the options C and D. And now that you are sure that the first statement is correct, the only option that is left is A, that is one only. Hence the correct answer is that Asiatic lion is naturally found in India only. And regarding the double-humped camel, it is found in Central Asia. Now with this we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.